Hi, welcome to another museum moment. My name is Ellie Gettinger. I'm the education director at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. And today we are going again back to our 2018 exhibit, Blacklist, the Hollywood Red Scare. Yesterday we had a delightful talk with Larry Ty, who wrote the book, Demagogue, The Life and Long Shadow of Senator Joe McCarthy, which you can find that on our YouTube channel or on Facebook if you're interested in that talk. And one of the things that we thought while we were talking to Larry is that we would go into a little more depth about some of the themes that we explored in our Blacklist exhibit. And so today I'm taking on one of my favorite finds from this exhibit. I got pointed in the direction of movies and how movies were shifted. And one of the big things that starts happening through the Blacklist is that the content of movies actually shifts. And it's an interesting moment that happens, and it shows kind of a longer range kind of government program. We talked on Tuesday about in the 1940s and 1947, the House Un-American Activities Committee convened to explore subversion. But what we're going to start with today actually happens even before 1947. So in 1942, under the direction of J. Edgar Hoover, among others, that there is a push to kind of identify the way in which movies are being used to subvert public opinion in the United States. Now, one of the big things that happens during World War II is there's a push to create films that are pro-war and that are supportive of our allies. One of the big concerns is that America has joined World War II and we are now allied with Russia. And there's this concern that Americans aren't going to trust Russians and this isn't going to be a good alliance. And so we need to create some pro-Russia films during this moment. And this comes from the top, actually. The movie that we're talking about right here, Mission to Moscow, is one that Franklin Delano Roosevelt sends a book that was written by one of his former ambassadors, Joseph Davies, to Warner Brothers and says, you need to make this into a movie, and they do. Now, I can tell you, having seen this film, and I know there are a lot of people who probably have not, this film actually is crazy with propagandic sort of pieces. And it's a really interesting movie. It's based on Davies' experience in the 1930s as the Soviet ambassador. They have show trials. They have Stalin appearing. Stalin actually seems like a really cordial guy in comparison to Hitler, who they talk about, but you don't. Actually, I think you do see at one point in the movie. And they're showing kind of Soviet productivity and all of these pieces. And it's certainly propagandistic, but as Jack Warner says when he when he testifies in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, he saw making of this film movie as a part of the war effort. And he says, as sure as, ships were taking food to to get through blockades, that this was our work within the war. The FBI saw it differently. And they talk about and these files are all found online. They've all been scanned and put up, and you can see there's things that are redacted. There are things that were redacted in several of the files. But what they say about this is this picture is based upon the book Mission to Moscow, written by former United States Ambassador Joseph E. Davies. The pro-Soviet propaganda disseminated through this picture is so obvious that it was criticized by numerous newspapers on these grounds. Informant blank related the picture caused a controversy which resulted in the Communist Party's changing its technique of inserting communist propaganda. So their sense is that because the propaganda was so obvious here, that they have to pull it back. Now, in most of these, I will say the propaganda is a lot less obvious, but there is a whole class of movies that's made during World War II that then becomes seen as being subversive. Some of that can be so minute, the kind of things that they're calling subversion. For instance, there's a line in the Ginger Rogers movie that was written by Hollywood 10 member Dalton Trumbo, where she says share and share alike, that's democracy, and that was seen as communist. communism, that in and of itself. As time goes on, after World War II has ended, they continue this pursuit of communist subversion in films. And some of the films that they're hitting are some of the best regarded films of the 1940s and 50s. So, for instance, Best Years of Our Life was a huge hit and actually a huge critical success as well. It won Best Picture. It won, I believe, several Best Acting awards as well. And it was seen as a realistic portrayal of what it was like for soldiers to come home after World War II. And one of the things that comes up in this film is that it's showing that it's hard for soldiers to come home, that it's not this immediate, easy process. One of the characters is a man who lost his hands in the war, and that there's these challenges. They're the challenges that all of these different soldiers in all of different life spaces are coming back to. It is a really beautiful film. The one thing that they really point to is one specific scene. And it's a scene in which a banker who's employing Frederick March comes in, and he tells Frederick March that he shouldn't be giving a loan to a veteran. And then as March is leaving, his face changes and he looks disgruntled. And so they say the mean-spirited look of the banker is enough to discredit bankers. And it's an interesting point that just by showing a banker in a bad light is that communist subversion. That's the kind of thing that they're pointing to as a constant within this. So going back, this program was run by the FBI until 1955, so well into the blacklist period. And they have records on all sorts of movies. It's a Wonderful Life, which if you look at the way the banker is portrayed there, there's a clear sense of, ooh, maybe that is subversion. But on the flip side, Jimmy Stewart's character is also a banker, Mr. Bailey. They run a savings and loan, but he has that same thing. High Noon is an interesting film because the big issue they take with that is that its writer is someone who took the fifth in front of the committee. Roman Holiday, similarly, they're questioning its provenance and who wrote it and what were their intentions in this. And Gentleman's Agreement, which is actually earlier than the rest of these films, or it lines up with It's a Wonderful Life. They're really looking at the way the police are portrayed in one particular scene and the question of whether anti-Semitism needs to be portrayed at all. One of the big things that they say in their report is by showing anti-Semitism as demonstrated in Gentleman's Agreement is a way to make anti-Semitism more prominent. If people didn't know about anti-Semitism, then they probably wouldn't be anti-Semitic. So those are the kinds of pieces they're picking out. And in some ways, I would say it would be a badge of honor for a movie of this time period to have an FBI file, because it means you're probably taking on something of social conscience. At the same time, the film industry decides to police itself, and they decide they're going to shift their rhetoric. And so they hire Ayn Rand, who is pictured here as she was seen testifying before the House Un-American Activities Committee. At this point, she's written Atlas Shrugged. She is called as an expert witness because she is also writing for Hollywood. And in particular, she is there to talk about a movie called Song of Russia. In Song of Russia, her claim is that this is clearly a work of propaganda because no one in Russia smiles, and there are smiling peasants in this movie. So the screen industry hires her in 1947 to create a screen guide for Americans, where she creates 13 different areas in which you should remove these pieces from your movie to ensure that they don't have communist subversion. And they include everything from don't take politics lightly. You guys aren't experts on politics in Hollywood, so you can't portray them. Don't smear the free enterprise system. You can't show our system of commerce in any sort of bad light, because that's going to be communist subversion. Don't smear wealth. So going back to the banker in It's a Wonderful Life, that would be in that kind of universe. Don't smear the profit motive. Don't smear success. Don't glorify depravity. By the way, that one always makes me think of all of the shows of the last, 10 years on television, like Breaking Bad and Mad Men. They certainly wouldn't have appreciated those. Don't deify the common man, and don't glorify the collective. Don't smear an independent man, and don't use current events carelessly. don't smear American political institutions. So for one of the movies that we explored for our Blacklist exhibit was a movie called Pride of the Marines, which was all about the Marines. It was so effusive about this guy's war effort. Except there's one scene where they're talking about, again, what people are coming home to, what they can expect when they return. And that one scene makes the whole rest of the film a work of communist subversion. The president of the Motion Picture Association of America, Eric Johnson, says, in this period, we'll have no more Grapes of Wrath, no more Tobacco Road. We'll have no more films that deal with the seamy side of American life. We'll have no more films that treat the banker as the villain. Now, if you look at films before the Blacklist in 1947, about 25% of films had some sort of political or social context in them. By 1954, at the height of the Blacklist, that number is about 8%. And so it not only shifts who's making movies by saying you can't work in the industry, but by saying this is what we find appropriate to be in the industry, it also shifts the movies that get made. And it means that if you look at the culture coming out of Hollywood, and actually even if you extend that into radio and television at this time, it becomes a much more homogenous, much more facile universe. You don't get complex statements in the same way. There are some, but you don't get the same sort of challenging political works that you would have gotten a decade before. It changes the way America sees itself, and it changes the way the rest of the world sees us too. The last piece of this that I'd like to explore is how it impacts individuals. And this is a guy named John Garfield, who is actually the star of that movie, The Pride of the Marines. He also is in A Gentleman's Agreement, and he had been a well-known actor, although kind of more as the second star in most films, especially larger ones like Gentleman's Agreement. And he is writing to a producer here named Dory Sherry in 1950. At this point, Garfield has been blacklisted. He's not getting work. And he says in this letter, I'd like to work in a picture for you. And the terms would be entirely secondary. My schedule is crowded, but the kind of picture is what's important. That's why, of course, I'm talking to you about it, because I think we are the same on the subject. It's our democracy. Certainly it needs improving all the time, and I'm never going to, out of fear of being unpopular, stop beefing. But it is undoubtedly the best in existence by far. And it's so much better than all the dictatorships, including those which pose to be as people's governments like Russia. I would like to work in a film which has this as a subject matter. It would seem to me that this would be about as timely as picture as one could make. And I think it would be a box office success. So he is saying, let me make a picture about American democracy in order to get myself off of the blacklist because of my alleged connections to the Communist Party. He actually was never a member of the Communist Party. He had done a lot of fundraising for anti-Nazi leagues during World War II, and his wife had been a member of the Communist Party. But because of those connections, he loses all of his work, and he actually dies at the age of 39 of a heart condition. That many feel was brought on by the stress of the blacklist. So the censorship of the blacklist had intense pressure and intense problems for many people who were involved. But it also meant that our culture shifted drastically, and we didn't get to see the type of films that question who we are as a people and what we're doing as a country. Thank you for sharing this moment with me. I hope you'll come again next week. We're going to be exploring some social justice themes, one around the 100th anniversary of the right to vote for women, and also a preview of our Luba Lukova exhibit on Thursday. So we hope you'll join us 2:00 Tuesdays and Thursdays here at jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. If you'd like this or any of our museum moments, you can find them all on YouTube, and also at jewishmuseummilwaukee.org. Please feel free to drop us a donation. Thanks for sharing this moment with me.